Imagine removing everything from a room. The air, the dust, the light. Nothing left. What remains feels obvious. Empty space. Nothing. But here is the unsettling truth. That emptiness has never been empty. Not for a single moment. Even when all matter is removed, even when no particles remain, space itself does not become silent or inactive. Something is still happening there, constantly. Invisible activity fills what we call nothing, far beyond what your senses can detect. The universe does not allow true emptiness. What looks like absence is actually a restless background, quiet but alive. And once you realize this, the idea of nothing begins to fall apart. Because if empty space is never truly empty, then what does nothing actually mean? When we say something is empty, we usually mean one simple thing. There is nothing there. No objects, no matter, no substance. An empty box feels empty because you can put something inside it. An empty room feels empty because you can walk through it freely. Emptiness, to us, is absence. We imagine space as a container, a vast, invisible box. That only becomes interesting when something occupies it. Take everything out, and what remains seems irrelevant. Just background, just nothing. Even in science, this intuition feels natural. We talk about vacuum, about regions of space with no particles, no atoms, no light. And it's tempting to think that once matter is removed, nothing meaningful remains. Space becomes passive, inactive, a silent stage waiting for something to happen. This way of thinking feels so reasonable that we rarely question it. After all, if you can't see it, touch it, or measure anything inside it, what reason do you have to believe there's something there at all? So empty space becomes shorthand for the complete absence of activity. No change, no motion, no energy. Just a blank gap between things that matter. But this idea of emptiness comes entirely from human intuition. It is shaped by everyday experience, by boxes, rooms, containers, and gaps. It assumes that space itself is nothing more than a place where things happen, a neutral backdrop. And as long as we stay at familiar scales, that assumption seems to work perfectly well. The problem is that the universe does not operate at our scale. And when we look more carefully, the idea of space as nothing starts to quietly break down. Here is where intuition begins to fail. Imagine creating a perfect vacuum. No air, no dust, no atoms, no light. By every everyday definition, this space should be completely inactive. Nothing to move, nothing to vibrate, nothing to change. But when physicists examine empty space closely, they find something unexpected. Activity. Even in the absence of matter, space refuses to sit quietly. At the smallest scales, fields still exist, and those fields do not remain calm. They fluctuate. Brief bursts of energy appear and disappear, not because something causes them, but because the structure of reality allows it. Empty space is restless. It is filled with tiny, unavoidable variations, too small to see, too fast to isolate, but always present. This activity is not noise layered on top of emptiness. It is part of what emptiness is. If space were truly nothing, there would be nothing there to fluctuate at all. But measurements tell a different story. The vacuum has properties. It can be affected. It can influence matter nearby. Two objects placed close together in empty space can feel a force between them, not because something is passing through the gap, but because the space itself is doing something. This is deeply unsettling, because it means that even when you remove everything, you do not reach nothing. You reach a different kind of something, a background that cannot be turned off, a baseline of activity that remains. even when the universe appears empty. So the question shifts. Empty space is not silent, but if it is not nothing, then what exactly is it? Let's try a different way of seeing this. Imagine a region of space so empty that nothing familiar remains. No atoms, no light, no radiation, just space. Now imagine you could pause time and step inside that region. At first, it feels like nothing is happening. There is no sound, no movement, no visible change. But look closer, not with your eyes, with the idea of scale. Zoom in beyond what your senses can perceive. What you find is not stillness. You find constant fluctuation. The fields that exist everywhere in the universe do not shut off when matter disappears. They continue to ripple, to shift, to momentarily concentrate energy, and then release it again. These fluctuations are not rare accidents. They are built into the structure of space itself. Even when space looks empty, it is not a flat, featureless void. It is more like a restless surface, constantly trembling in ways that average out at large scales. Now imagine watching this region over time. Tiny disturbances appear. They vanish almost instantly. Not because something destroys them, but because they were never meant to last. They are allowed to exist briefly and then disappear back into the background. Nothing causes them. Nothing controls them. They are simply permitted. This is not space misbehaving. This is space doing exactly what it naturally does. The reason you don't notice this activity is not because it isn't there. It's because it doesn't leave lasting traces. At scales you can detect. Your experience of emptiness is the result of motion that cancels itself out. Just as the vibrations inside a solid object average into stillness, the activity inside empty space averages into silence. But silence does not mean absence. It means balance, a dynamic balance that never fully settles. So when we say empty space, what we really mean is this: a region where nothing remains stable long enough to become a thing, but activity never stops. Space does not wait for matter to arrive before it becomes real. It is already doing something, always. And once you see this, the vacuum stops feeling like nothing at all. It starts to feel like a foundation, quiet, invisible, but undeniably alive. At this point, the word space starts to feel misleading, because what we've been describing does not behave like an empty container. It behaves like something that exists on its own. Space is not just where things are. It has structure. It has properties. It responds. When matter enters space, it does not move through a passive void. It interacts with something already there. This is why empty space can affect objects, even when nothing seems to be present between them. The vacuum can influence motion. It can shift energy levels. It can shape how particles behave. If space were truly nothing, none of this would be possible. Nothing cannot fluctuate. Nothing cannot store energy. Nothing cannot push back. And yet space does all of these things. This forces a quiet redefinition. Space is not the absence of reality. It is part of reality, not an object, but not nothing either. It is more like a background field, a continuous presence that everything else emerges within. Matter does not sit inside space the way furniture sits inside a room. Matter is a pattern that forms within this underlying structure. Remove the pattern, and the structure remains. This is why empty space still feels active when we look closely enough. We are not seeing leftover noise. We are seeing space itself. And that realization is unsettling because it removes the last place where nothing was supposed to exist. If space is something, then the universe has no true gaps, no blank areas, no complete absences. Even the emptiest regions are still participating in reality. But here's where physics becomes careful. It can describe how space behaves. It can measure its effects. It can predict its influence. But when asked why space exists at all, or why it has these properties, physics falls silent. It gives descriptions, not reasons, which leaves us with an uncomfortable thought. If space is not nothing, and never was, then nothing may not be a physical concept at all. It may be something we invented to describe the limits of our perception. At this point, a strange conclusion starts to form. Nothing may not be something. The universe actually allows. Everywhere we look, even where we expect absence, we find structure, activity, potential, change. The idea of nothingness feels obvious to us because our language demands it. We divide the world into categories: something and nothing, presence and absence, existence and non-existence. But nature does not seem to follow this division. When we remove matter, space remains. When we remove particles, fields remain. When we remove energy as much as possible, fluctuations remain. Each time we try to reach nothing, the universe leaves something behind. This suggests that nothingness may be a human concept, not a physical one, a placeholder for the point where our explanations stop. In everyday life, this works well enough. An empty room feels empty because nothing interacts with us there. But at deeper levels, reality does not disappear just because we are no longer aware of it. The universe does not create gaps simply because we expect them. It is continuous, connected, reluctant to allow complete absence. And this has a quiet implication. If nothing does not exist as a physical state, then existence may not need a cause in the way we imagine. Perhaps the question is not, why is there something instead of nothing? But rather, why did we ever expect nothing to be an option at all? This is not a conclusion physics can prove. It is a boundary it points toward and then stops. Because beyond this point, the question is no longer about equations. It is about how we choose to describe reality itself. So empty space is not empty, not because the universe is crowded, and not because matter is hiding somewhere unseen, but because reality does not collapse into absence when we remove things. Something always remains. A structure, a background, a quiet activity that never fully stops. What we call nothing may simply be the point where our senses and language fail, a name we give to what we do not interact with. But the universe does not seem to recognize that name. It continues to fluctuate, to exist, to offer potential, even in its emptiest regions. And that raises a final question. If empty space is never truly empty, and nothing may not exist as a physical state, then what does it actually mean to say that something exists at all? Do you think nothing is real, or only a limit of human understanding? I'd love to hear your thoughts.